Yeah. I'm not a very. No, our. There. High school.
Like a math unfair.
Sure.
Was this it?
Yes.
We probably should have looked up CEO. Probably. You would have helped us. See ya. No way. I looked at the clock, 11:55. Such a delay. Or the opposite of us. We went, got someone in the car. And we came back. You know, which.
I'm gonna say what I want to do.
Do you have like an hour? How much?
I need an outlet. It's the heels.
Like, the whole guy that's in there. It's a dinosaur. Its batteries run, so. Means like so. Dies. That's the only thing you see one by one. Every 2 years. So it's constantly.
You take that, oh, you took one there, yeah.
Well, that was.
I did the green color. I did. Stick out one.
This is my own one.
We nuggets, I went from the world. And he.
They got. And I want to do it. I think this is right. I opened up the zoo. Then I opened up my CS program. And then I.
You got word break.
They're all blue. Any favors.
Oh, it's true. I like.
Let's get started. Welcome back. Hope you had a good weekend. Drove back, got into LeGrand at about 3 a.m., but that's what coffee's for. So hope you all are doing well. We spent some time last week going through a set of 3 theories that in many ways are designed to help us be introduced to the process of doing theory in the class, different ways of thinking about and understanding the theory process. We will be looking into more theories this week. All of these theories are also candidates that you could use for your theory reflection assignment that's due this Sunday. So you might be thinking about, is there a theory from last week that really stood out to you that was really interesting? Maybe uncertainty reduction, symbolic interaction, or social exchange that you want to utilize for that assignment. Or one of the theories from this week. So today we are going to be looking at social penetration theory. We have somebody who is coming in before class started who had taken that before, talking about the onion, and it's a fun example. It's a good theory for us to really get a grasp of our human relationships. A lot of these early theories that we're looking at are very interpersonally focused. They're looking at meaningful interaction between 2 people, and they look at some of the ways that our communication is changing over time as we develop trust, comfort, rapport between people. So last class, we looked at social exchange theory. This is the theory that has this mathematical equation. The worth of our relationships is the rewards of the relationship, such as gaining social opportunities, getting our needs met, subtracting the costs, which might be monetary, emotional, social. We look at that overall and say, is this a relationship that's worth keeping? But there's a lot of people mentioned in the class. There are a lot of other factors that aren't considered here. The role of emotions, the role of culture, the role of family responsibility. Those are all things that we feel, even if a relationship on paper doesn't seem like it's worth it. Of course, we're going to stick our neck out to people that we care about, right? So according to social interaction theory, right, this would involve fate management, right? So how we impact our outcomes to affect our relationships. So how we manage our behavior and engagement with other people. For today, we are looking at social penetration theory. This is the theory you might be familiar with if you've taken a class like interpersonal communication. If you haven't heard of this theory before, that's okay. I think it's a very straightforward one, but also a really useful one. A lot of people, I think, kind of resonate with this theory and get a lot out of how it's used and integrated in our lives. That's an excuse for me to show a video clip from Shrek. So that's always a fun reason to have to talk about this theory. I also wanted to have just this reminder for folks. I'll be posting the Google form later today. I just want to give a minute for people who might still need to get that in or had an update related to that. So I will be posting that just a little bit later today. As a reminder, for your scheduled day, what you'll be doing is you'll be giving a short presentation where you bring in an outside article that's related and talks about your theory and explaining how that outside article connects or relates to the theory for that day. So today's theory is social penetration theory, SPT. So social penetration theory is dealing with the ways in which our relationships essentially move from very outside, peripheral, detached layers into more intimate, close, and connected layers, right? As we've talked about with theories like uncertainty reduction, oftentimes our communication with people in an early stage of a relationship can feel very detached. You're sharing basic information, your major, you're in school, where you're from, like information that's low stakes. People aren't going to necessarily use that information against you, or you don't feel like you're giving up or breaking walls down as you're sharing that information. But over time, as we feel comfortable and safe with other people, we find things in common with them, we tend to share more connected and intimate content with one another. In other words, this theory is suggesting that we're kind of moving along a line, right? From a very detached level where we don't share that much information with each other to a very close, intimate, and connected level. And that can happen over the course of relationships. Of course, that's not going to happen in every relationship. Perhaps there's somebody you saw walking down the hall, you're not really going to see again. So you just said hi, you're at a very superficial level, right? It's also true that relationships can go from being in a very close stage to being more detached. Good example is if you know a friend from middle or high school and you've gone down very separate paths later in life. So socio-psychological, interpersonal, positivistic, and empirical, similar set of focus areas to what we saw last week, right? This is another theory that's concerned with human cognition, explaining human behavior, particularly explaining it in our interpersonal relationships, and trying to take kind of the messiness of those interpersonal relationships and quantify it in a really clear way, right? Human communication is a super messy thing. Our interactions with other people involve a lot of depth, disclosure, challenges. So one of the ways that we can think about these theories is in the process of quantifying and making these things like mathematic and measurable, what's gained and what's lost. If we're critiquing and pushing back against theory, it might be the ways in which it's trying to quantify information about our relationships that just can't quite be quantified. So this theory comes from two social psychologists, Altman and Taylor. Again, as mentioned, a lot of these theories are going to come directly from communication studies, but they're also going to come from adjacent fields, things like psychology, sociology, anthropology, and related areas. In this case, the social psychology bent is important because it's trying to understand the motivations behind behavior, the motivations behind disclosure, and to understand sort of the cognitive reasons that we choose to share and engage with information. So if you're thinking back about this theory or you're looking through your notes, I think one of the easiest ways to remember this is that this is the onion theory, right? Over time, as we engage with relationships with other people, it is just like layers of an onion, right? We go from the very superficial, the very detached, the very surface level information, like the outer layers of the onion. Go to a grocery store and get an onion, like the outer layers, if you starting to peel and you're putting it in your shopping cart. Maybe it's still like a piece of it still hangs out in your shopping cart as you're trying to check out, right? It's a very, very loose layer that's very basic information. But we start to get into those deeper layers later. We also know, right, just like an onion, as you get into some of those deeper layers, trying to get into there, that, you know, the onion is spraying around and that might make you cry. So in the same way, we're sharing deeper, more emotionally meaningful information. We use this metaphor of the onion to make sense of the status of our relationships. Not only how comfortable are we with this person, but also a question of what is it that we choose to talk about? What are the topics or issues that we share with this person, right? And we consider how we develop relationships with this onion in mind. Again, we're not going to overshare and tell our entire life story to somebody that we just met. We're going to think about kind of what layer we are with that person, how much self-disclosure we've done with that person, and think about a way that's appropriate to communicate with them based on what our relationship to that person is looking like. So, a few assumptions here. One of them is the idea that our relationships are moving along the line, right? They're moving from non-intimate to intimate. So over time, as we spend more time, as we reduce uncertainty, right? Those relationships are going to become closer and more meaningful. One thing you're going to want to think about here is that there are going to be some theories in this course that are kind of that resonate and that fit with each other. I would say this theory, social penetration and uncertainty reduction, very much are complementary. They're both about how disclosure helps us to become more comfortable. They use different concepts, but they aren't like opposed to each other. We're going to look at some other theories later on in the class, especially as we get into media. We look at things such as uses and gratifications theory versus agenda setting theory, and those theories are not going to be compatible, right? So you might look at these theories and say, some of these make sense together, like social penetration and uncertainty reduction, but others don't fit. So thinking about the assumptions and how assumptions might clash is an important element here when we're comparing and looking at theories. But this is generally complementary to other theories we've talked about. Relationship development is systematic and predictable. Again, this is taking human elements and really trying to put it into something quantifiable and mathematical, which we can say is good, helps us to understand why we do what we do, but it can also be a challenge to take the complicated elements of making a new friend, developing a connection, and putting it into something we can measure. And self-disclosure is at the core of how we develop relationships. You think about our closest friends, those are friends that know a whole lot about us. Perhaps they're the people that have gone through thick and thin with us. They've seen us, struggle if we're trying to like win a soccer game. Maybe the people holding us over if we're vomiting in the toilet, right? Like they're people that have been through very difficult things with us. They've seen a lot of parts of ourselves and they come to understand us pretty well, right? Our ability to disclose and share details is how our relationships develop. We learn more about people, we become more closely connected as they share more with us. So, if we think about the onion, right, the onion is kind of dealing with different layers of identity and self. We can think about the idea here that we have the more peripheral layers. So the outer layers of the onion are dealing with very basic information. That can be things, again, like our age or major or hometown, things that, again, are low stakes to share, are non-threatening, they're potential conversation starters. Oh, you're a music minor? I'm a music minor too. That can be a way to start conversations. So it not only allows you to disclose safely, but it also helps you to kind of feel out the terrain and see what you might have to talk about. At the intermediate layer, right, this is generally dealing more with some of the values and beliefs that the person has, right? Generally speaking, at the intermediate level, that might be when people are sharing some of their interests in things like music, television and film. What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite TV show? Like that type of thing is an opportunity for people to kind of share and kind of identify with some of those elements a little bit more. What are some of the things that you like to do, right? It's trying to get a better picture of who this person is outside of kind of the basic labels that they might use to describe themselves. And then we arrive at what are considered to be the central layers, right? The very close, meaningful elements of somebody's life. Those can be things such as our values, our traits, and our fears, right? The things that we really hold dear. Are we people that really closely value family, the importance of really meaningful relationships with people? We value our independence. Are we the kind of people that like to go on a big hike on our own, right? The things that are important to us are the things that we choose to share with other people at that central level. It also deals with elements like our self-awareness, our self-concept, and our self-esteem, right? So if you have a best friend, somebody that you really feel connected to, there's a good chance you're sharing a lot of your anxieties and your deeper, meaningful feelings with that person. For instance, you've just gotten an interview for a big job, you're excited, you're anxious, you're nervous. Who do you talk to? Who do you vent to about that experience? Who do you feel comfortable giving those emotions to share with? So that's kind of at that central level is the underlying feelings that oftentimes you keep inside of your head, but you feel able to share with that person. So some key ideas here, right? It's not just that intimacy is physical, right? It's not necessarily about a romantic relationship necessarily, but that becoming more intimate and closely connected to others is also about the emotional and intellectual components. Our ability to connect with and understand what other people are feeling and experiencing, to recognize that perhaps we have a friend who struggles with anxiety, right? And recognizing how that impacts their ways of engaging, and also intellectually. What are the things that we really like to talk about and we're really interested in, right? My partner and I have been together for about 6 years. We like to joke that on our first date, we were too shy to talk to each other about anything except our research interests. As we both met in grad school, and it was an easy way to talk about what we like to do at a very superficial level. But that can be a way to kind of peel back and share deeper information. Relational development, right, can also involve moving backwards, right? Dissolution or deep penetration. In other words, we can become closer, but can also find ourselves moving away from other people. One way this happens is ghosting. We just stop talking to somebody. Maybe we are making some headway. We're starting to converse with people, but we just got really busy. We forgot to answer their texts, or you answer texts, but it's a whole lot later. Time is a really big element here, right? Oftentimes, if we've taken a lot of distance and we're reuniting, we find that the person that we previously connected with really well is at a different stage in their life, has gone in a very different direction. Transgressions, right, are violations of the rule or norms. If you think about it, it's almost like a game of chicken, right? Our ability to become closer, better friends, and more connected with people, well, that involves at some level somebody pushing things a little bit, right? Maybe you've shared very basic information, and maybe one day, as you and a friend are talking, you might say, I really need to talk about my parents' divorce, the way that my parents' divorce has been impacting me in my life. So somebody is taking that first step. Transgressions can mean that you are going against what both parties are considering acceptable, right? Again, sharing like this incredibly deep, intimate sob story about your life to a stranger you've just met is generally not something you're going to do. The way that we develop relationships involves what we consider to be both depth and breadth, right? Breadth refers to the range of topics and things that you can discuss with somebody else. So if a relationship has strong breadth, that's somebody that you feel like you can talk to just about with just about anything. Maybe you both really enjoy sports, you're both students at you both really enjoy the outdoors, right? There's a whole lot of different things you can talk about. Maybe you're not having the deepest conversations in the world, but you feel like there's a whole lot you can cover with that person. Or perhaps you have a friend or person that you feel really closely connected to about one thing. Like, for example, you're on the lacrosse team, your friend is as well, and you don't have a whole lot in common. You might have some different values and beliefs. When it comes to lacrosse, you two are very closely connected and have a whole lot to share, right? So depth is how much into a topic you can go. Breadth is how many topics you can cover with that person. We think back to social exchange theory, and somewhat similarly, social penetration theory is suggesting that our relationships have both rewards and costs associated with them. In other words, we are assessing those as we're choosing our relationships. We're thinking about the risks, and we're thinking about the risks associated with self-disclosure. If you're in middle and junior high school, you probably know people can be really mean and really nasty to each other with the use of gossiping, spreading rumors, and so on, right? Perhaps you tell a friend that, I have a crush on so-and-so and this person. And this friend goes around and shares that information to that person or tells the whole class without your consent, right? People oftentimes violate trust. You've got a lot of rumors. If you watched the film Mean Girls, right, you're familiar with a lot of the dynamics of middle and high school relationships that can be incredibly challenging because somebody discloses, they provide trust about a topic, and then they go out and share that more publicly when it should be in confidence. So that can be one of the biggest drawbacks of self-disclosure is how is that person going to use that information, and how might they use that information in a way that's hurtful, right? That can be one of our biggest fears. Another fear is we don't want to be a burden on other people, and we worry sometimes about sharing emotions or sharing things close to us. And other factors like culture and family, right? There are families in which it's common for people to say, oh yeah, we can talk about all sorts of stuff, but we don't talk about our feelings, right? Or the kind of norms and expectations in regard to gender, gender expression, perhaps we're not really socialized to share or feel our feelings, or can only share a range of feelings that are considered acceptable to share, right? That can be a challenge for us with self-disclosure too. Like, I'm feeling really sad and I want to share that feeling. It can be challenging we don't feel like we have the comfort and trust with others or the understanding of how to disclose in that way. So as mentioned, social penetration theory is moving between different stages. Again, you can think about it as the different layers of the onion. Starting out, we have the orientation stage where we're sizing up and trying to understand the basic information. You can think about this as that outer layer of the onion. Who is this person? What is going on in their lives? We move on to more exploratory affective exchange. In other words, you're starting to develop a sense of this person's personality. Wow, they've traveled all around the world. They're very outgoing. They're very exuberant. They're very enthusiastic. You learn things about that person, about their interests, and you start to understand a little bit about what makes them distinct from others. Okay? At the affective exchange stage, that's when you and another person are able to just kind of have a casual conversation and speak openly with that person, right? Perhaps you get a text from a friend and they say, hey, want to go get lunch? And you go get lunch, right? That means you're being able to have just more open disclosure and conversation with others. And then at the stable exchange, you're getting to a stage of complete openness with that person, right? You can share anything that's on your mind, you feel comfortable, you feel safe, you feel supported with that person. So you're moving to that specific level. That's not to say that people don't establish boundaries, right? That doesn't mean that somebody is available 24/7. If somebody's studying for a major exam and another person wants to disclose personal information about their lives, right? Those things might not line up in that moment. The person taking the exam might decline, but to say that generally speaking, you're able to talk about a whole range of different things. So there are a few different critiques of this theory. Again, you take all the theories with a grain of salt, and the critiques and the pushback against those theories allow us to be better at critical thinking. One of the ideas here is that self-disclosure can be too narrow. You recall one of the core assumptions of this theory is that the core of relationship development is self-disclosure. In other words, our relationships develop purely on the basis of our ability to share information with another person. But it's 2023, we've got the internet, whatever goes on the internet never leaves. People use a lot of different forms of social media. People will look up other people online using social media too. All that to say, there's a lot of information, whether it's very superficial or even more personal information that people share on something like a story or social media post that is not disclosed, right? Perhaps that's information available to the public, or perhaps it's information that is shared kind of privately. Maybe you are not friends with a person on social media, but your friend is, and they show you something that they posted. Okay, people who will do like vague book, sub-posting, right? Like not directly naming names, but posting about something. You might figure out that they're doing that and talking about you online. So self-disclosure is not always the way to measure how relationships develop. We can learn information online. This is common, like if somebody has like a dating profile using like OkCupid, Hinge, and so on, right? They might share a lot of that early on information and self-disclosure just on the basis of the profile. So looking online can be one way that the relationship self-disclosure process is a little bit different. Another critique of this theory is that relationships are not necessarily linear, right? This theory suggests we're moving on a line, very superficial, very close and connected. But that doesn't necessarily play out in our relationships. We think about people who are close to us. We might have people that it feels like the relationship is close in certain respects, but not in others. For example, maybe you have family members and you like completely 100% disagree politically with them. So for instance, my mom and stepdad, they're on completely different ends of the spectrum. So while they're very close and connected, right, about a lot of different topics, they know they can't talk politics, right? They know that that's off limits. And if they get into that conversation, they're going to get into a fight and people are going to get hurt. That might be connected to their values and beliefs, things that are important to them. But that can be a limitation that they have placed on them. So they might talk about a more neutral or comfortable topic like dogs. You have relationships where sometimes it feels like you're really connected, you really understand the person. Sometimes they do something that really takes you out of that closeness, like they say or behave in a way that's really hurtful. Sometimes people feel very open. Other times people feel like they can't share their emotions with anyone. All that to say, our relationships and the trajectory of the relationships, the highs and lows, might not follow this linear path. And the other thing to consider is that relationships are not necessarily defined the same way by everybody. If we think about factors such as culture, right, and elements that shape our identity and disclosure, relationships are not necessarily about like more or less intimate via self-disclosure. Sometimes relationships can be very close, but don't necessarily involve that level of engagement. Perhaps there's a shared understanding between you and another person, or perhaps you have like a very strong working relationship. You talk about topics related to your team, your job, your internship, and you have good connection with that person, but not necessarily in other areas. So the way of measuring relationships, you can push back against as well. So I'm going to use a classic example here. You might know the classic and now like memed to absolute death film Shrek, right? Which was kind of sort of a parody of a lot of fairy tale style films, a lot of Disney films, right? Main character Shrek Ogre has this speech that he gives to Donkey, where he's talking about how he's like an onion. He has layers. There's more to him than meets the eye, right? And what this example shows is the idea of self-disclosure, the making of agentic choice to share identity, and the frustration that might come with people not understanding the different parts of us and the different parts of the entity. So I wanted to share this example here because I think it does a great job of capturing and helping us to think about this theory.
Okay, you're gonna go fight a dragon and rescue a princess just so Farquaad get you back to the swamp, but you only don't have because you filled it full of freaks in the first place. That's about right.
You know what? Maybe there's a good reason Donkey shouldn't talk.
I don't get it, Shrek. Why don't you just put some of that open stuff on? You know, problem. Let's see this horses. Grab his bones to make your friends. You know the whole over trip.
Oh, I know what. Maybe I could have decapitated an entire village and put their heads on a plate, got a knife, cut open their spleen and drink their fluids. Does that sound good to you?
No, not really, no.
For your information, there's a lot more to ogres than people think.
Example?
Example? Okay, ogres are like onions.
You think?
Yes.
No. Oh, they make you cry.
No.
Oh, you leave them out in the sun, they get all brown, start sprouting little white heads.
No. Layers. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. You get it. We both have layers.
Oh, you both have layers. Oh. You know, not everybody likes onions.
So kind of a funny example, right? If you're ever trying to remember social penetration theory, just imagine Shrek screaming layers, onions have layers, right? You know, Shrek and Donkey, they're talking. Donkey has a set of false expectations about how ogres are. They're these evil creatures that kill people. You know, Shrek is like very angry. He says, no, they're not like that. We're more complicated. We've got layers. There's more to us than meets the eye. You know, there's a joke about how not everybody likes onions, right? And that's an example. Sometimes people self-disclose, they share details about themselves to other people. It's not quite a match. People don't quite connect with each other. That's one of the challenges of self-disclosure too, is that while we're opening ourselves up to other people, we might not find things in common with those people. We might not share those interests and elements of identity in that same way. So that can be one of the challenges of that process. We can feel frustration because oftentimes we want to accelerate. We want to feel like we're reaching a point with a friend where we're comfortable and that they really understand who we are. And that takes time and it takes work to get to that place with that person. So I want you to take some time on your own. This will be part of your tenets for the day. And you can write or type, thinking about the different layers of social penetration theory. Think about like what would fit under some of these layers for you. So what are things that you would classify in your more peripheral layer, right, early layer? What might you put in your more intermediate layer? What would you put more in your central layer, right? So what are the ways that you would characterize yourself according to these different layers? You can either kind of put it down as a list, or you could kind of visually like use like an onion model if you would prefer to do that. We'll give you a few minutes to think about and work on this. take another minute to wrap up what you have here on this model. So once you finish your kind of modeling of the layers here, what I'd like you to do is to think about some of the major relationships in your lives, friends, close family members, people that you regularly are in contact with. Which layers do some of these relationships fit into? For instance, which relationships would you put in the more peripheral, more intermediate, and the more central? So I'll give you a few minutes to think about and place some of those relationships into some of those different layers. Take a moment to finish up this part of your response. Once you've finished part 2, what I would like you to do is to find somebody else in the class. You can also form a group of 3 if you would prefer. And just take some time to share and compare the diagrams that you've put together or the different layers that you've put together. And what are you noticing as you share? What are you finding to be kind of similar or different? So once you've finished working on your model, find somebody sitting near you that you can chat with a little bit. Compare and perhaps take a couple notes for yourself about some of the things you're noticing from each other's models.
For me, for the virtual player, yeah. What's the favorite airplane microphone you want to talk about? And how many days?
If I have it, right? But I kind of feel like the max, like,
No, I will not.
yeah,
Uh,
that's my
and then
favorite.
read it, I said, like, and then overlaid by kind of map. Yeah. Yeah, I knew I would.
Yeah.
They're like the rest of our friends. Your best friend. So I don't hate that. Outside of you.
What about your interview?
And just finding out like their hobby. Outside of that. Possibly talk about like whatever. That's correct. How could they go?
Like,
Whatever, you know. Like, you know, just do that.
And relationships, I feel like
Then for
extended
me,
them.
center layer is like friends, close family. For me personally, Alex.
Give you a couple more minutes to share.
And so that's where I talk about.
Yeah.
Ability, or emotions.
So my physical reaction is I was like, I was fine. More in depth, so I risk your interest, so like, I guess, like having topics like man important.
Years. Yeah.
So kind of like.
And then
like
I think it's the
on my questions.
you're right. That kind of like almost really- I think it's reserved for that. Character development. Character. And then honestly, anyone who's made it that from the I don't know. My one pet peeve with this structure. I feel like there needs to be a layer in between. And like center to me is stuff in my life. Intermediate or I feel like there's a step in between there that.
So you take your to wrap up your conversation. We've done so already.
Yeah. And so that feels really bad to say, you know, all my family that are probably my other. Sometimes with acquaintance. Step in there, be there, you know.
Okay, so sounds like folks are just about wrapped up with your conversations here. So in kind of going around and hearing some of the things that you all were sharing in partnerships and pointing out, a few things kind of stood out. First of all, sometimes, right, we can use the very peripheral layers to ask kind of interesting icebreakers, right? It's an opportunity for us to go down a train of thought, get people out of their comfort zone. So sometimes we're asking questions that are designed for a more outer layer, but can actually reveal deeper information or build greater trust, right? One of my favorites is, you know, if a little kid asks you, what is your second favorite kind of dinosaur, right? That's such a fun question. Such a great way to like start to build a relationship with a kid, right? Where you're sharing you know, your answer to that question, you're talking about, oh, well, I think it might be a Triceratops, and why, right? Like, so sometimes a question can be in the peripheral layer, but asking fun, engaging, interesting questions can get you building comfort with other people. Another thing that folks pointed out is one challenge with this theory is that because you only have so many layers, sometimes our relationships are more complicated. Like, sometimes, as some people pointed out, you're having a hard time figuring out, is this more intermediate? Is this more central? There's like space in between some of those layers. So we might think about how like the amount of layers doesn't actually align with what some of our relationships look like. And another thing to consider here is that because somebody is family does not necessarily mean that they're in the central layer, right? We have people in our family that we might have some distance from geographically, or we've just found that our relationships with them are a bit more challenging or detached, right? And we might have friends that are in more of a central layer, right? We have, you know, a term that's been used a lot to describe like the chosen family and the idea of developing close relationships that might not necessarily be connected through blood or through upbringing. So we, you know, there's a lot of different ways that who we put in different layers and for what reason is impacting our relationships. So as we think about this theory, think about some of its limitations, it's still a useful way to kind of map out and understand where we place self-disclosure in our relationships. Who do we trust to share important information and why? Why have we made those decisions? How have those things changed? Because it's not a static process either. So to wrap up for today, make sure that if you haven't already, that you are completing that form. I will post the schedule for the presentations later today. We talked about social penetration theory, the process of self-disclosing, sharing, and the levels of comfort with self-disclosure. On Wednesday, we are going to be talking about social information processing theory, which takes some of these ideas in interpersonal communication and puts them in more of a mediated context. So look forward to that. Please pass forward or email your attendance for the day if you haven't already done so. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again for Wednesday's class.